Join me for a conversation with Doan. He's been the head of IT for many small biotechs that have either recently gone public or are about to go public, and we discuss the ins and outs of IT's role in a small public biotech. Also, if you like what you see on Biotech Bites, like us on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Welcome to Biotech Bites, where we speak with IT leaders in biotech about their thoughts and feelings around technology and trends that we're seeing today. I'm your host, Steve Swan, and have the pleasure of being joined today by Doan in San Francisco. Nam, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Steve. Excited to be here.
How are you today?
Good. I'm great. A little bit foggy in San Francisco, as it usually is in the month of May, but doing well.
It happens. It's dealable, right? So usually when I start out, I want to give our users and our audience, just a little bit of base knowledge on my guests. So usually my first question is pretty much, along the lines of tell me a bit about yourself and how you came into the IT industry and biotech itself. So you can give us a little background there. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So, a little bit about myself. As you can probably tell, I grew up in Australia, right? I've got that little bit of the Aussie accent.
Yes.
Maybe not as much as I used to have. I've been here for a while. So I actually came to the US as an exchange student at Cal Berkeley, across the bay from San Francisco. And that was my senior year of comp sci. And so I did that at Cal Berkeley. And then I was offered a job by Oracle Consulting to work in Silicon Valley. And that seemed like the better thing to do rather than fly home to Australia with no job and no money. So I started working for Oracle, and they trained me up to implement ERP systems. So I got trained up to do that straight out of college, and I spent a good 8 years implementing ERP systems, like building up that expertise. And 8 years is quite a while to be implementing ERP systems. And at the end of 8 years, I kind of came to a realization I didn't want to necessarily be implementing ERP systems for the rest of my life. And so that's when I decided to jump to the customer side, which is for implementations, it's the IT side. And so initially I was managing an ERP system, and then kind of grew my knowledge base to other business systems like CRM systems. You might remember Siebel. I'm kind of dating myself.
That was tough. That was tough sledding.
So CRM systems, HR systems, business intelligence, and really built up a career in IT management from there. But a strong foundation in business systems, particularly ERP systems, which are kind of my bread and butter, if you will.
Yeah, well, I've found that through the years, right? And you've graduated into a point where you've become the head of IT for many different organizations, and we'll get to that in a minute. But what I've found over the years in doing this for 26 plus years is that the folks that find themselves into IT leadership roles, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, the majority of them, I would say 60% or so, either come from ERP or infrastructure backgrounds. Because, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, they cut across all areas of the company, right? Both the ERP and the infrastructure. So you get a full picture of what's going on. Would you agree or disagree with that?
No, I do agree, actually. And I think even between business systems and infrastructure guys, it's more weighted on the business systems guys. And the reason for that is because we work so directly with business leaders to understand the business. So we really, partner with the business in a very direct way, where we're implementing systems to enable them. So to do that, we have to understand the business, right? And so we have a deep view and a 360-degree view of the business.
And that's been your wheelhouse, really, too, from our conversations in the past, I think. The business partnering, right? That's been something you've hung your hat on quite a bit and done a great job at.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think you can be an IT leader without partnering with the business and understanding the business. And I think the 8 years at Oracle Consulting doing implementations for various types of companies, various sizes, various industries. It helps you build up kind of a business context of understanding different businesses, right? Manufacturing company, biotech company, a chip manufacturer, worked for a retailer, right?
What made you want to say, "Hey, biotech, let's stick with this"?
But biotech, I came into biotech because of, my first um, experience with biotech was with Twist Bioscience. And that was because I actually knew some of the founders, right? And so they understood that I was an IT leader. And at that time, they needed some IT leadership. And so I was the guy. So kind of came sideways into it, but then also then continued on to Third Harmonic, which is a drug development biotech. And so that's been my experience in the last 7, 8 years. And IT leadership can be very similar in different industries, but you do need to have some industry specific knowledge as well, particularly when it comes to things like compliance, right? So
Yeah, sure. Well, now, so based on all those companies you just mentioned, and there could be more in there, right? But based on those companies that you mentioned, I've noticed that they've either, um, gone public while you were there, or had just come public right before you got there.
yeah,
So, which says a lot about, where you position yourself or where others see you, right? But my question, I guess, more specifically for our other IT leaders, is where do you think IT sits? What do you think IT's role is in the company that's either just gone or going public,
yeah,
or
yeah,
because they tend to be in smaller sizes, right?
yep,
And
yep,
what
yeah.
what are your thoughts around that?
Yes, so I I strongly believe IT leadership is very important, right? And of course, I would say that as an IT leader, but
Yeah.
um, I do think I have the experiences to demonstrate that, right? And I was at two fast growing companies, Twist Bioscience and Sunrun, that became public while I was there. They needed a lot of IT leadership, and I can dive into some details there. And then at Third Harmonic, a little bit of a opposite experience where Third Harmonic went public very early with not many people at all, 22 people, no IT no IT employees at that time. But then I was hired a few months after they went public, and I was hired to build up the IT functions so that we could operate as a public company. So it's a little bit the opposite way around, but still kind of demonstrates the importance of strong IT leadership. And when I think about those experiences, Steve, there's two probably key areas I would call out where strong IT leadership is critical for companies that want to become public companies and that are growing rapidly. It's business systems, right? It's probably the more obvious one, but then also there's compliance, right? So particularly if you want to become a public company. If we look at business systems, and we kind of talked about this earlier, a strong IT leader is going to make sure that they understand the business and they understand the business processes, and they will make sure that the business system is implemented to drive those business processes, right? Um, and without strong IT leadership, the result is often failed systems implementations, right? And I've seen plenty of those, and when I see those, it's very rarely because of the technology or the system itself. It's because the implementation is wrong, right? The implementation did not meet the business requirements, or the business requirements were not well understood. Um,
Right.
yeah, and
And you've had a long history of that going all the way back to your Oracle days, right?
yeah, yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen a number of poor implementations, and when you have that, it takes you years to dig yourself out of it. And the most extreme example I have is one company implemented an ERP system with no IT leadership, no IT oversight
Well,
out of
that's a
that
big
home.
case for, companies making sure they have, folks inside
Yeah,
representing their best interest, whether a full time or a
yep,
fractional, doesn't
yep,
matter,
yep.
right? not advocating either way on that, but you got to have, somebody in your corner, somebody on your team. You can't just
Yeah.
they probably thought they were saving some money, right?
Yeah, they outsourced it, right? It's like, hey, we'll be fine. We'll outsource it to this systems implementation partner.
And they're all the same, so we can spend less on this one. But guess what? They're not,
Yeah,
and you got to
yeah,
get the experts in, and you got to really, really find it. Well, so one of the things you mentioned throughout as we were chatting there a couple times was compliance, right?
yeah, yeah,
And for fast growing companies, and I hear this a lot from business and IT leaders, compliance slows us down. We got to check all the boxes. We got to document everything.
yeah,
How does, from the IT side of things, how do you balance the speed of where business wants to go
yeah,
versus the compliance and the FDA? And I mean, it's a push and pull all day long. And you're kind of caught right in the middle, aren't you?
yeah, yeah. Probably a couple of things I want to say there. The first thing is, if you want to become a public company, you have to deal with compliance, right? There's there's no way
No
around it,
choice,
right?
right?
No
Yeah.
choice. So you have to deal with it. And if that's the case, then you should adopt those compliance controls as early as possible, right? Make
Mm.
it a part of your day-to-day operations so that so that people aren't having to think about it because it's how they operate, right? It's already how they
Right.
operate. On the IT side, there's a set of controls that every public company needs to do, right? You can't get around it, right? Every single auditor will ask you about these controls around access management, change management, and they're really best practices. So you should just do it implement those controls as early as you can. Train your IT staff. Train your IT staff so it becomes part of their daily operations, and they don't have to think about it. So that when it's time for the audit, you don't have to do anything extra or special because you're already doing it as your day-to-day operations, right? You really don't want to do that audit in the first few months of you implementing that control because I guarantee you will fail, right?
Now,
Because
what if it's a non-public company? What if they're owned by a PE firm, or if they just haven't gone public yet? Is it the same, would you say, or is it a little different?
no, I would still say, if you have line of sight and you know you want to become public,
Or
then
even have a little inkling? Let's start at the beginning, right?
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
these controls that I'm talking about, particularly on the IT side, they're best practices or leading practices, if you will, right? And they're things that you should do anyway, right? I mean, if IT is going to make a change, yeah, we should get approval from the business, right? That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we should do that. And so the earlier you do it, the earlier it becomes a part of your daily operations, and you don't have to think about it. Um, but to answer the other part of your question, it does. Even doing these controls, even as a daily part of your daily operations, it does. There is a balancing act between speed and compliance, right? And um, that these IT controls are probably a softer version of that. But I have seen where, on the one hand, we had a compliance issue, and on the other hand, we had business speed, right? And to solve the compliance issue, it was going to cost, fairly significant business speed. And it comes down to a business decision, right? And it actually was an executive level decision. The CEO made the call, and CEO made the call. We're going with business speed, and
Mm,
so we were left with a compliance issue that we had to deal with.
yeah. But that was known going in. That was an
Yeah,
accepted risk
yeah,
that was
yeah,
made at the top level. And
yeah, yeah,
if it comes up,
yeah,
this is,
yeah. And it's not IT's role to make that decision, but it is our role to identify the issue, shine a light
yeah,
on it, and quantify it, and say, hey, this compliance issue, here's the solution, and here's the cost to business speed. Do we want
yeah.
to do it? What's our risk appetite? Right? That can only be answered by the business.
I hear a lot about that. Like I've recruited for a lot of cyber security roles and things, and some of the leaders, there's one company that's a huge company now, but back when I was working on some security roles for them, they were less than 1,000. Now there's, 12, 15,000. There's a lot of people. But back then it was, okay, Steve, we want somebody who sees and understands that gray area we can't have somebody super black and white because, like you said, it's going to slow us down too much, and we're willing to accept that, right? But some cyber leaders are like, no, 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 no. I don't even
Yeah.
play in the gray. I'm black and white, and that's it. And
Yeah.
to find their person for them was a long, hard struggle because the security folks see the weight on their shoulder. It's their issue, not the CEOs or the CIOs. They see it as their issue, and there shouldn't be any gray, and it should be all black and white according to them, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
some of them, but
Yeah.
then you can find the ones that are like, you know what, everything's got it's a cost risk balance, right? The
Yeah.
more you
Yeah.
spend, the lower your risk, but you're gonna have to spend a lot if you
Yeah.
want zero risk, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's all depend on that risk assessment and what the risk appetite of the company is. And the risk appetite of the company will change over time, right? As the company
Sure.
matures, their appetite for risk will probably become smaller, right? Particularly if they want to become public or if they need to start dealing with the FDA, for example, right? The FDA's risk tolerance is zero, right? Is they're dealing with patient health.
We were just talking about this, right? It's the same for us,
Hmm.
people, humans. The older we get, the more we got to lose, the less I'm gonna be on my mountain bike jumping
Yeah,
over
yeah,
stuff, right? You know?
yeah,
We got more to lose. So it's
yeah,
like, okay, I'm going down. I'm lowering my risk appetite, and I'm not gonna
yeah,
be
yeah,
doing crazy things on my mountain bike. When I was 25, maybe I would have, right? But those days are long, long gone. That's
yeah.
an old Steve Swan, not a new one.
We also have a better understanding of our limitations and perhaps that our bodies aren't as capable as they used to be, right?
Right. Yeah. My dad's 86. I think he still thinks he's 37. And it's like, Dad, I
Yeah,
mean, he's shuffling, and
yeah,
he thinks that he's pretty slick getting away from people and running away. He says running away sometimes when he's got to get, but he's not running anywhere.
yeah,
It would take him 3 minutes to get out of a conference room. Anyway, so one question I like talking about too is, you know, as a company continues to grow, right? You know, what, I always like asking folks, some along the lines of, what are you thinking about or what do you think now as your company grows, right? Because you've been in that situation several times. As your company continues to go, if you're looking in the rearview mirror or after you grow one or two or three, or in your case,
yeah, yeah.
several, right? What do you know near the end that you didn't know at the beginning that you should have taken care of, right? What
Right,
what are
right,
some
right.
of the things that I'm a small company CIO. It's my first time being in that seat. What would you tell me to do? What would you tell me to look for? What am I supposed to keep my eyes on?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And it's something that's not, like you say, it's not obvious at the beginning, right? But
Yeah, I
it's,
don't know anything.
and it kind of always has. It really comes back to having good data, right? And it's something that no one really thinks about when they first start out, because when you first start out and you're standing up systems, right? People aren't thinking about data.
You're just
They're
running, running, running,
Yeah,
running,
they're
right?
running, and when they're running, all they're thinking about is transacting, right? All they think about is, hey, how do we transact? How do I pay that invoice? How do I process that order? Hey, I want to start a clinical trial, right? So they need to stand up systems so that they can transact, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
kind of their way of, it's a company's way of keeping score, right? The more we're transacting, the more we're doing, and
makes
so they
sense.
want to see the scoreboard ticking over. As you grow, the company will begin asking questions that can only be answered by looking at your data. And that's when you're going to start looking at your data. And that's when you'll see if your systems were configured well to begin with. It's so that your data is structured well and your data is tagged appropriately so that you can analyze your data, so that you can answer these questions that can only be answered with data. And so that realization generally only comes much later on when you have a lot of data. And then you start trying to sift through it. It's like, oh, wow, I can't sift through it because it's not tagged, or it's not structured. Right? So that's when you discover whether your systems are configured well or not, and whether the systems are integrated properly, right? And that's these are things that you know IT folks hopefully will bring to the table at the time you're implementing your systems, making sure the system is configured properly, that transactions are tagged properly so that you can analyze the transactions and you can slice and dice the data. And we've talked in the past before, Steve, about, with AI, today's AI large learning models, right? If that data is trash, right, if it's not tagged appropriately or it's not structured properly, that AI model is going to have a really tough time making sense of that data,
At
right?
best, a tough
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
right?
So it's all coming back to the data again, right? It's like you got to
Yeah.
have good data.
Now, coming into an organization, right? A small organization that's growing,
Yeah.
and let's say, I'm a scientist. I just started a company. I don't know this stuff, right? Do you find, and I'm sure it's different everywhere, but I'm just curious. Do you find that the owners of a company, the leaders of a company, they want to listen to their new IT guy talk about how we have to spend money on getting our data in shape for the future, for something we don't even need today, right? That's got to be a tough sell, right? I would think.
Yeah. I
I'm
mean,
just I'm just putting on my business leader hat. What would
yeah,
I
yeah,
want to
yeah,
hear? I
yeah.
wouldn't want to hear that because I'm like, oh no, do I really need that? So
Right. Yeah.
just curious. Has that been a
Yes.
struggle?
I don't think I have explicit conversations about good data versus bad data because it's and there are ways to have those conversations, but the way I position it is that when you're configuring your business systems, right? When you're implementing your business systems, when it's configured properly, your transactions will be well formed and your data will be well formed, right? So you don't really have a conversation about the data. It's baked into configuring your systems properly to meet your business requirements, and it'll come about during discussions about business requirements because you know, let's say you're looking at a order management system and you're talking to your sales leader and he's saying, well, you know, I want to be able to segment my orders by industry, right? And it's like, okay, well, what I'm thinking there's we got to have an attribute called industry that has all the different types of industries we sell to, so that in future, the sales leader can slice and dice by industry, right? So I got to make sure that that attribute's in there, right? But if you create the system without that attribute, the sales guy's he's not going to be able to slice and dice by industry, right? And so it just kind of comes out as a part of understanding the business process and understanding the business requirements, and that then leads to a well configured system that then leads to good data.
Yeah, and like you just alluded to, good data is a prerequisite, an absolute bare minimum for making sure that your AI makes heads or tails of what you're asking it to make heads or
Yeah,
tails of, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
you put bad data, and I've made the analogy a million times. You put bad gas in any great looking car or a great looking motor, it's not going to run. It's not
yeah,
going to go, right?
yeah, yeah.
You know?
Definitely. Bad data is really really detrimental, right? And I've seen bad bad data at a number of places, and you know, I liken bad data to like a slow poison, right? Because it's not going to stop you from transacting. You won't notice it for the first, you know, 4 years, 3, 4 years, depending on how fast you're growing. You won't notice it, right? You'll happily continue transacting, but then at some point, it's going to start slowing down your business, and then even worse, when your business leaders start asking like the deeper questions that can only be answered by data, that's when you'll really understand. Oh, I have
Oop,
bad data.
oops. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I didn't realize it would take that long. Yeah, but I
Yeah,
guess it
well,
makes
it
sense.
doesn't stop you from bad data. Doesn't stop you from transacting, right?
Right.
And when I say bad data, I don't mean like completely incorrect transactions. I just mean like
Not
transactions
structured.
that, yeah, they might be structured okay, but they might not be structured in a way that will meet future requirements. They're structured okay so that you can transact, so you'll happily keep transacting. But then once you really want to analyze the data will fall short, and it's that type of bad data that will stop you from progressing to that next kind of analytical level.
Well, let me ask you this, and this doesn't come up explicitly all the time, but I have had some conversations about this in the recent past. When we talk about data, and we talk about good data,
Yep.
and we talk about 2 and 3 years down the road, some people who are deeper into the data field are telling me it's a living, breathing database. You need maintenance constantly on that
Yeah,
data.
yeah,
But
yeah.
then there's others that say, and these are cost conscious people say, cool, we got our database together. Nobody touch it. We're good. And let's go. Right.
Right, right, right.
So I guess maybe that the question would be, can a good database or good data turn into bad data because of lack of maintenance over time?
Yes, it can. Your requirements will change over time, right? The way you want to look at your data will change over time. And sometimes your data set that you have doesn't have all the attributes that you need. And so you might have to go back and update your data, right? And there's this whole field around data curation, right? Curating your data. And it's a continuous thing where you're curating your data so that your data gets better, right? And, people spend, there are roles for data governance, data curation, right? Because your data is not, like to your point, your data is not static, right? You need to kind of curate your data to evolve it to meet your changing business needs. And at the time when you implemented the system, you kind of understood what the requirements were at that time, and you configured the system to meet the requirements at that time. But your requirements might change over time, and then you do need to go back and curate your data, update it so that it can meet those new requirements. So, I'm with the other guy that said, yeah, you need to curate your data, right? And maybe the AI large language model needs something extra to be able to hook into the data, right? And so you update your data, you run queries and you curate your data, and part of curation also is there's some transactions that are just bad, right? You kind of get rid of those, right?
I had one person who joined a large to medium-sized pharma company. He came from another company, and he was more on the business side, but he had data scientists working for him, directors and associate directors of data science. And he calls me one day and he says, "Steve, I got a problem." I said, "What's your problem?" He said, and again, new company, so he wasn't there to put the data together and stuff. He said, my directors and associate directors are spending a lot of time going in and triaging data when something's not working out." And I said, "Well, in my mind, and this is me talking, so maybe this is I'm forming a question here for you.
Sure, sure.
So in my mind, what I said to him, my knee jerk reaction was, listen, like I pointed out my daughter, for example. I said, you got data science kids coming out of school who've dealt with data, right? They've helped companies get data and database together. If you get some sort of, I don't know, you call it almost minor leagues or whatever, where these kids would maintain your data for half the price or less of what you're going to spend on that director or associate director, their mind's going to get numb in 2 years or a year and a half. So maybe you promise them, again, you're going to move from here to here to here, and you could keep that process going, and you could keep your database live and curated and clean, and the ontology all correct and all that stuff, as opposed to letting these bigger titled folks spending a lot of money to go back and triage the data, which they probably have no interest in doing anyway. So does it make any sense to suggest that to somebody what I did, or does that not make any sense?
It does make sense, right? And it's a good entryway to understanding data. What I would say there is it's the data science guys, they should supervise these entry level data folks because the data science guys will understand, well, hopefully we'll have an understanding of what the business context and what the business requirement is so that they can give direction to the data analysts, let's call them, right? But then over time, the data analysts will also gain an understanding of why they're doing certain things and what the business reason is, and be able to connect business drivers with what they're doing to the data, right? And then they can progress as well, and hopefully hopefully progress to a role where they have an understanding of the business and where they can talk to the business and have an understanding of that and take it back to what they're doing with the data.
So we've tackled the data coming into the systems, the data coming into AI. Maybe we'll back up a little bit further into AI itself. What are
Yeah,
your
yeah.
thoughts around AI? I mean, a lot of the folks that I have on my podcast really, they've got varied
Hmm.
opinions, they've got varied ideas, but
Yep.
I think they all agree about the data that what we're talking about. We all have different angles on it. We talk about it, but AI itself for the biotech industry, you've seen some small companies, you've seen what they do with it. You've been on the enabling side of that, right?
Yep.
What are your thoughts there for AI in our industry?
First of all, the impact of AI in general on all businesses, I struggle to think of in industries where it won't have an impact. I have no doubt there will be a big impact, right? And it's happening as we speak. And I think the thing to keep in mind is that the progression isn't linear. It's the progression is kind of geometric, right? And so things are changing very quickly. And I think in the tech world, there's particularly it's particularly impactful in some specific business functions that really lend itself to large language models. And I know that the function that springs immediately to mind is actually customer support, right? Because most companies that have a customer support function, they have the customer support has a good, well-formed knowledge base, right? They've got their content well organized, it's tagged. That's perfect for pointing a large language model at it, consuming that knowledge base, contextualizing it, and then being able to answer questions about it and knowledgeably. And there's a lot of progress being made in customer support is one area. Then there's other areas where I see a bit of push and pull of, on one hand, there's the, hey, rah, rah, AI is going to take over. And then the other hand, there's other people saying, hey, hang on, it still needs supervision. And the one, the interesting one is, the, the writing of code by AI bots, right? Or AI collaborators. AI can definitely write code, but it definitely still needs to be tested and QA'd and integrated. And there's so much else that goes into writing code as a part of a bigger team. It will definitely accelerate the process, and over time, I think it'll get better. But I think Gartner just recently came out with a paper, and the headline was, yes, AI will accelerate code development, but in the end, it may take you more developers than what you started off with without AI. But the message there, I haven't read the paper, but I think they were being deliberately kind of headliney catchy. And I think what they mean there is that you'll still need people to QA check it, test it, do all those things, and in the end, you may end up with more developers, but but your velocity will be higher, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of progress being made. What I think is really interesting is this concept of agentic AI bots, right? Where these AI models have a framework where they can actually make decisions now based on what they learned, right? And they make decisions on their own, and then they execute them, right? So it's taking that knowledge to the next step where they make decisions and they execute them based on what they learned. So that's kind of really exciting and kind of a little bit scary for some fields, right?
Yeah. Well, and that comes to the one of the points that one of my CIOs made to me when he was talking about AI. That when AI is being QA'd, one of the sort of processes that should get pushed through AI, especially the customer service bots and things like that, is kind of put it through a test of being an employee, right? So it doesn't, if it says something that's not good, that's like an employee. So you as a company, you're on the hook,
Yeah.
and you've got to justify those answers, right? 'Cause
Right.
otherwise, you can't just say, "Well, hey, I did it. Sorry." That doesn't roll. That doesn't
Right.
work.
Right. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that somebody brought up to me, and I thought it was pretty interesting. You know, so I guess that leads to sort of my next thought is how do you think that, employees, right, in the workplace that are at some of your companies, how do you think what are your thoughts around how your company or companies should approach using AI in the workplace? I mean, should it just be let's go, let's all feed it up? Should it be
Right.
controlled? Should there be, How do you think this whole thing should be? Because everybody's
Yeah.
got a different idea on this one right here.
Yeah, and it's, you see people on the whole spectrum, right? But, my opinion is that you need to embrace it. And I think the main reason why I say that is because it's already in your workplace. Right? So you may, you might want to stick your head in the sand and pretend, no, like, no one's using AI in my workplace. It's like, no, it's already in there, right? It's there in your Microsoft Office 365. It's there in your Zoom. It's even in your Adobe Acrobat, right? When you open a document in Adobe Acrobat, Acrobat says, "Hey, would you like me to summarize your documents?" Like, "Hey, I did ask you to scan my documents." You can try to turn that off, but you can turn it off. But then,
Yeah.
if whenever it gets patched, it'll probably come back on, right? It's almost impossible to hide yourself,
Yeah.
and so you need to embrace it and put in like some guardrails, right? And I think every company should have a AI use in the workplace policy, right? So that people can understand how they can use AI. And it can be some really basic things like, hey, don't input sensitive data or IP into any AI search boxes, right? It could be as simple as that. And it depends on what industry you're on, what your appetite for risk is and all those things. So definitely work with your legal counsel to develop that policy, but it should be a part of your employee handbook or, whatever it is that all employees read, right? And then that can give you and the employees guardrails to how they can use AI. And that is, I guarantee there are plenty of use cases where employees can gain use out of AI, right? Whether it's in the workplace or whether it's, on a website, maybe they can use Perplexity or, there's so many, there's so many tools out there now. You will find ways to be more efficient and you should embrace it because it's already there in your workplace,
Yeah, I had one guy say to me, he's like, I can, like you said, I can bury my head in the sand. I can pretend like no one's doing it or using it. But guess what? If I have it off my corporate machine here, they're over here
Yeah.
using it. It's
Mm.
here. They're going to use it. So why don't accept it? Why don't we accept it? And why don't we come up with our policies? And some even go as far, some are on the fence on this, right? They don't know whether they should have sort of programs to beat it up and use it. Let's keep hammering away on this because let's figure out what it can do and what it can't do and our best use cases for it. Some are like, oh, that's a little aggressive. Some talk about toggling on the learn switch, right? Or toggling it off. You toggle it off, it's not going to save the data. I had another guy tell me that he was using AI once with a consultant about a year and a half ago. Up pop proprietary information of a competing company's drug.
Right.
He screenshotted it, got it over to that CIO, and yeah, I guess they took care of it. But I mean, that's the ultimate nightmare, right? Right
Yeah.
there for
Yeah.
biotech.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. And then that's why you want to have that AI use in the workplace policy to provide those key guardrails so that you can play with it safely.
right, yeah. And if you're not, then you could put your company right in the crosshairs of big risk,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Thank you very much. I always have one last question I ask of folks, but
sure.
before I get to that, more on the personal level. But before I get to that, I think we've covered a lot of ground, right, on data and AI and all sorts of different things in your background, right, and
Yeah,
how you
yeah.
got to where you are. Um, Anything else that you think we should cover as it pertains to technology, biotech, where we are, where we're heading, anything new that's coming? Your thoughts and feelings on anything along those lines that we haven't hit that you think is important for our listeners to think about or pay attention to?
Probably the only other one I would mention is cybersecurity, Steve. Cybersecurity now is the risk from cybersecurity is very clear and present for any company now, right? And that's why the SEC now requires all public companies to do certain things about cybersecurity, right? Because it's a risk to any public company, and it's a risk to any company. So you make sure you're taking care of some really foundational key cybersecurity controls that are frankly pretty cheap to implement, right? Some basic things like cybersecurity training, a good laptop protection, single sign-on with MFA, right? And these little things will make you so much safer, right? And everyone is at risk from cybersecurity risk, and so just keep that in mind. I think I saw a stat saying smaller companies are at higher risk than bigger companies because the hackers know that the smaller guys think they're not targets, but they are. Like these hackers they're motivated by all sorts of different things, right?
It's a lot. I mean, I hear these companies, even the small ones, they've gone again exponentially. The billions of attempts on their
Yeah,
to hack them over a year's time frame. Billions.
yeah,
I mean, it's just crazy. I
yeah.
mean,
And these hacks are
so
getting more and more sophisticated, right?
right.
You want to hear a crazy hack story?
I'd love it. Yeah, go.
So have you heard of deepfakes?
Yeah,
The AI deepfakes, right? The video or audio AI simulations of people, right?
yeah.
And so this didn't get much coverage a couple of years ago, but it happened a couple of years ago uh, in Hong Kong. An analyst working for a financial institution in Hong Kong gets an email from his CFO saying, "Hey, big emergency, got to jump on a Zoom. We'll talk about the emergency." The guy jumps on the Zoom, and there's his CFO, and he sees some other C-suite folks on the Zoom, and they're discussing this emergency. And the end result is they turn to him and say, "Hey, you got to wire." I think it's 23 million, by the way, 23 million to this account. And he's like, "What?" And the other execs say, "Yeah, you got to do it. It's a big emergency." So he does it, and then later on finds out that each of the C-suite on the Zoom is a deep fake imitation, right? And I haven't seen too much details of whether it was like a live simulation or whether it was just recordings that these hackers were playing, at the right time so that it looked like they were having a conversation. I think it's live. It's a recording rather than live deepfake simulations because I don't think we're quite there yet. But I can imagine we will get there pretty soon,
I
right?
bet.
But it was 23 mil, right? I'm pretty sure it was 23 mil. So
Wow, that's crazy.
yeah. So
And
what do you?
there's it's gone. Nothing you
Yeah,
can do. It's
yeah,
over. Yeah.
yeah. So
You did it. You did it voluntarily. It's not like someone stole that from you. You sent it,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then an insurance company's going to say, "Well, how do we know?" I mean, you didn't send it to someone We're not reimbursing that. Wow, that's crazy. That's a good story, though. Well, thank you for sharing that one. The last question that I like asking folks, like I said, it's more along the personal lines. It has to do with music, right?
Okay.
So I like music.
Yeah.
We go and see a lot of concerts. There's a lot of different bands we see. So I like asking every guest about any live performance they've ever seen and what their number if you've seen live music, some haven't, right? But what would be your favorite live band or live performance or live concert you've ever been to in your entire life? What would you say?
Whew,
That's a tough
tough
one, huh?
one. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you go to a lot of live music? Or have you?
Not a ton, but
Not a
I've been
ton?
to a number of them. I think it's between two.
That's fine. Yeah.
Between two performances for different reasons. One is U2. I love U2, and they've been around for so long, produced so much good music, and I think their heyday was when I was really into music, right, in the 80s and 90s. So definitely one of my favorite acts, and I really regret not being able to see them when they played at the Sphere, right, in Las Vegas.
I wanted to go out to that too. I didn't make it
But
either.
by the time I heard about it, I was looking at ticket prices. I go, no, sorry.
Woo! Yeah, I'm not doing this. And then you gotta fly, and then you gotta stay, and
Yeah,
then you
yeah,
gotta do all that. Yeah, I agree.
yeah. But then the other experience is kind of a little bit opposite end of the spectrum, where it was kind of like a small venue. The great performance was Lenny Kravitz, right? And you kind of forget how much material Lenny Kravitz has, but he's been
got a
around for a long
ton.
time too. So
Yes.
so
He
loved that
has.
performance, and it was a small setting. It was at the Bill Graham Center in San Francisco, and
Ah,
we were right there. If you could see Lenny,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that I'll always remember that. That was
My wife
a
just
great.
saw him in, where was she? Jazz Fest down in New Orleans.
Oh right, okay,
She said it was great. Yeah, she went down for not this past weekend, the weekend before. She was
yeah,
down there, so,
yeah,
yeah,
no,
we like seeing a lot of live music, but yeah, U2, one of those I remember we were in, my one of my best friends and I, we were in ninth grade, and I was living in I grew up in Rhode Island, and, ninth grade, we went into there's only 2 places to go in Rhode Island, Providence or Newport, and so, it was spring, so it was too cold to go to Newport, so we went to Providence one day. It was I don't know, Saturday, Sunday, and we went to Brown University, which is right there in the middle of the city, and, we were hanging around with a bunch of college kids, and they were having their college week, and their band that showed up for their college week, this is 82, 83, anyway, was U2,
oh,
and tickets were like
82.
tickets were like 15 or $12. We didn't
Wow,
have the money. We were like $8 short to buy 2 tickets, so we didn't get in, and that would have been awesome,
that would
but,
have been great.
I don't know, live and learn, I guess. Ninth grade, carry more money, so if I have to go back and talk to myself. So, well, listen, Nam, thank you very much. That was awesome. And to our listeners, if you liked what you saw and what you heard here, go to Spotify, Apple, YouTube, like us, subscribe to Biotech Bytes, and get in touch and let us know what your thoughts are. Nam, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Steve.